morning. My name is Jon Nix. This is my good friend Jim Plew. And we are two undergraduate business students here at the Kelley School of Business in Indianapolis. And we have two unique stories that happened on separate occasions that have really made all the difference in our lives. And we would like to share these two stories with you all today.
So when I was a sophomore, I had these big aspirations to pursue a career in investment banking. I wanted more than anything to be on Wall Street, to be successful, right? And so everything that I did was really just another logical step in that direction. I was determined to take advantage of any opportunity that could get me just one step closer to this career. And so I remember one evening after class, I was invited to attend a graduate school admissions event that was hosted in Indianapolis by Duke, Virginia, and Yale. And so I was excited. I went back to my apartment, and I printed off copies of my resume. And I sat down and I made a list of probably 50 questions that I wanted to ask at this event. And so I put on my suit, and I grabbed my papers, and I headed for the city. And throughout this event, I listened very intently, and believe it or not, I actually got answers to most of the questions that I had brought with me. But I had saved just one for the very end. And so at this point, the room was just about empty, and they were clearing off the tables and packing everything up. And I looked around, and I was actually the last one there. So I took my papers, and I walked up to the graduate director from Yale, and I asked him my question. And I asked this: do you have any advice for me as to what I should do or maybe get more involved in going forward so as to best set myself up for this successful career in investment banking and a graduate program at Yale that could accelerate me along this career path? And he paused. And you could tell he was thinking of the best way to answer my question. And so I waited. And I thought, maybe he'll tell me, do more research, or you should think about doing this internship, study abroad, whatever it was. I really didn't care. I just wanted to know so I could bring it back and fit it into my master plan, right? But I could have never predicted what he actually said to me in that moment. And I'll never forget his words. He said, Jim, you may not want to hear this right now, but all I can tell you is if you don't love it, then you just really shouldn't do it. If you don't love it, don't do it. I struggled with this for over a year, but it eventually reframed everything that I thought I knew about success.
So I'm going to throw it back a little bit. And I was 2 games into my last season of high school football. My team was off to a good start, and my own individual dream of playing high school football, or college football rather, was starting to look like a reality. And I was really fortunate to have a coach who really took an interest in his players. And he made it a point to get to know each one of us on an individual level. And one particular weeknight after practice, he took me out to get some ice cream. And we were just kind of hanging out. You know, the mood was pretty light. And we wrapped up, and he was driving me home. And you have to understand that my coach played college football as a linebacker. And as I was the linebacker for my high school team, I thought that if he were to give me some advice on this, drive home this one night, that it'd probably be something pretty specific to the position. He might tell me to take a better angle when I'm going in for a blitz, or maybe work on my footwork when I'm dropping back into pass coverage, or something like that. And but what he said to me really had nothing to do with that. And I'll never forget, as we were driving down the road in his Jeep Wrangler, he said to me, John, when you play football, you're either motivated by a fear of failure or an expectation of success. And he said it's either one or the other. And the people who watch you play and watch our team play on Friday night, they're not going to know the difference. They're not going to know if you're out there worried about making a mistake or if you're actually really confident in your ability to play. And the results might look the same, but it matters to you, because the only way that you're going to be the player you can be is if you learn to be motivated by this expectation of success. And honestly, it took me about 2 years to really be able to look back on this moment and realize the value, not just in terms of playing football, but on my life. And by seeing my own motivation through the eyes of my coach that night, made me realize that my own limited viewpoint of motivation was holding me back from reaching my full potential.
So what do our two stories have in common? You might say, okay, you are two young and naive kids who happened to receive some good advice from some people that you looked up to. And while there may be some truth in this, we're convinced that there is a much deeper lesson that links our stories together. In fact, it is this lesson, this idea, that eventually changed our entire lives. And it is the notion that we see the world through lenses. And there are just two different types of lenses, internal and external. We may not even know it, but we all have our own unique internal lens. Just one. It's what we see day in and day out. It's how we all view the world and see our own lives through our own unique perspective. And so seeing through external lens then means viewing something, really anything, through a different perspective, perhaps the perspective, the lens of somebody else. But here's the problem. What we all see through our internal lens is often just a byproduct of our environment, of our upbringing, of society, perhaps of something that we were told as a kid, or something that we heard from one single source long, long ago, and we don't even know it. In fact, our internal lens feels comfortable to us because it's all we've ever really known. But we cannot begin to see through this lens with any amount of clarity before first seeing through external lenses. And so in the case of John's story, he was motivated predominantly by a fear of failure. His internal lens was in effect constraining his perspective on motivation. And by seeing this through the eyes of his coach, he was able to begin the process of recoloring his internal lens in a new way. And in the case of my story, I had sort of adopted this false definition of success, right? And seeing this through an internal lens like mine really was holding me back from pursuing something that I truly loved. And all it took was seeing my situation through the eyes of this graduate director from Yale for me to really redefine what this word meant in my life. And so herein lies a paradox. The internal lens is the single most important lens that we all have. Yet we are blind until we see through external lenses. And as a corollary, the more that we see through external lenses and take different perspectives on things, the more important it is to not lose sight of the importance and the value of our own unique internal lens.
So it's helpful to think about this process of reframing in terms of internal and external lenses, because it's something that happens very much in the moment, right? I mean, these stories that we shared with you today, they're a point in time in our lives where our views on something were reframed. But we've come to realize that these are only first steps or first movements along a lifelong journey towards becoming self-aware and thinking independently. And this journey can maybe easily be understood by looking at Plato's allegory of the cave for a second. And this was a metaphor that was first introduced to me by a freshman philosophy professor named Dr. Joseph Long. And in this metaphor, Plato describes for us a scene where there's a group of people at the bottom of a cave, and they're constrained, so that all they can see is the wall directly in front of them. And behind them, there are some puppeteers, and they're moving around in front of a fire. And this fire is projecting images of these puppets onto the wall. But for those who are constrained, I mean, this is all that they've ever seen. This is their reality. But we know that if they were to be freed from these constraints, they could turn around and they could see that what they were viewing on the wall, these shadows, was not reality, but mere reflections of the real puppets that were behind them. And if they were to further venture outside of the cave, they would discover and realize yet truer and truer realities. And we were able to be freed from the constraints of our own limited biased assumptions about success and motivation. We were able to see them through the eyes of someone else. And in this way, we were able to turn around and see perhaps a better perspective of what we had been only seeing mere shadows of in terms of our views on success and motivation. And when we see things in new ways and in fresh perspectives, we become aware of ourselves, in that we see what's shaped the way that we see the world. And at this point, we have a choice. You know, do we hold fast to the assumptions that we've always known that have shaped our internal viewpoint, or do we revise them in light of these new experiences and these new perspectives? And this is a very independent choice, right? This requires solitude and reflection. And this is where self-awareness begins to yield independent thought. And we've found in our own brief journeys that this process is worthwhile because it's set us on a path to reach our full potential in that it's allowed us to discover and rediscover the path that most resonates with who we are right now and who we want to become.
And we're convinced that this path out of the cave, this journey toward self-awareness and independent thought, should be facilitated by education. And while we think it can be to some extent, we've also found that all too often education either stifles this or effectively blocks it altogether. You see, when education forces students to spend all of their time checking off boxes and jumping through hoops, there is no room for this journey towards self-awareness and self-discovery to happen. So therefore, we passionately believe that the new design of education should be structured with these lenses in mind. And we recognize this is not some new profound theory, some groundbreaking philosophy. It is fundamental. But we must be intentional in our effort to bring it to the forefront of the way in which we educate and raise the next generation. Thank you.